You're here to be Trump's personal propaganda mouthpiece. You are a clear and present danger to democracy." Those words from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez echoed through the hearing room like a hammer strike, but they also marked the moment of her career's self-destruction. She believed that publicly comparing Karoline Leavitt to an authoritarian propaganda machine on live television would cement her as an unyielding progressive icon. But Karoline's response wasn't anger, nor trembling. She calmly closed her notebook, lifted the microphone with a steady motion, and slowly placed a thick file stamped with official seals on the table. What was about to unfold was no longer a routine questioning, but the beginning of one of the most systematic exposés in congressional history. Hit the like button, because you're about to witness AOC being unmasked not only by her impulsive words, but by a chain of undeniable evidence, shady finances, leaked emails, questionable donations, and the truth about how she exploited crises to build her political brand. The hearing room that day was packed, studio lights illuminating every face, television reporters typing furiously on laptops, live streams racking up millions of views. As AOC raised her head high, her voice ringing with accusations, many in the room nodded as if convinced they were about to witness a historic moment for the progressive cause. But Karoline only gave a faint smile, her eyes never leaving her opponent, her silence so profound that every cough, every pen tap in the room echoed. AOC thought that silence was a sign of unease, but viewers watching the live stream felt something else. It was the silence of a prosecutor before delivering an indictment. The room felt heavy, the air frozen, bracing for the political storm taking shape. AOC pressed on relentlessly, talking about Karoline's youth, calling her a communications aide who's never led anything, emphasizing she lacks the integrity to challenge a seasoned congresswoman. But each attack only thickened the atmosphere. Cameras zoomed in on Karoline's face, calm eyes, a slight smirk as if she'd prepared for everything. She waited for her opponent to exhaust her ammunition, letting that arrogance become the starting point for a classic reversal. And when Karoline placed her hand on the thick file with solemn seals, the entire room fell into absolute silence. It was clear this was no longer political theater. This was a public trial, and AOC had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The moment Karoline placed her hand on the file, every sound in the room seemed to stop. AOC hadn't even savored the afterglow of her latest attack when the entire room shifted its focus to her opponent. Camera lenses zoomed in, capturing every detail, the thick black folder, the top corner embossed with official seals, the edges neatly bound with red ties. Karoline looked up, her voice steady, not loud, but piercing through the heavy air. "Thank you, Miss Ocasio-Cortez, for giving me the opportunity to start with the truth, not slogans." A few murmurs rose from the press section, as no one expected Karoline to open so calmly. She slowly opened the file, revealing the first page filled with dense financial tables. Cameras zoomed in on the large screen behind her, silencing the room. This is an audit conducted over the past 3 years, publicly available to anyone who bothers to read. But perhaps some people here were too busy building their social media image to notice. The moment the words landed, the room shook. AOC frowned, trying to interrupt, but Karoline raised her hand and continued. From 2021 to 2024, California's state budget, under the governor's leadership, ballooned by over $200 billion, yet homelessness rose 36%. Living costs became the highest in the nation, and hundreds of thousands of residents and businesses fled. That's not an achievement, it's evidence of failure. She spoke clearly, deliberately. The media instantly clipped the moment, with the caption "Karoline Leavitt, this is failure," flashing across screens. AOC jumped in. "We're talking about him, but you're attacking a democratically elected governor. You're deflecting." Karoline turned, a faint smile flickering. "No, you're the one deflecting. You call me a propaganda mouthpiece, but this file shows who's really turning public office into a personal tool. I don't need slogans. I have data." Scattered applause broke out from the back rows, quickly silenced by the committee chair's gavel, but the ripple effect spread through the room. Karoline flipped to another page. "This is a migration report from the Census Bureau. In 2022, California lost over 340,000 residents, the highest in history. People didn't leave because of the climate or scenery. They left because they couldn't afford the taxes, housing, or insecurity. This isn't my opinion. It's federal data." Her voice was steady, each word a hammer blow to the political foundation AOC had just tried to defend. Meanwhile, Newsom, sitting a few rows away, tried to stay composed, but his tense, flickering eyes betrayed him. Cameras caught the moment, reporters scribbling furiously. Seeing her ally falter, AOC grew desperate, interrupting, "This is just an oversight hearing, not a courtroom." Karoline turned sharply, her gaze cold as steel. "Exactly. And like an oversight hearing, we have a duty to expose the truth to the public. They're the jury, and they're watching live." The room crackled with tension. Other lawmakers sat still, avoiding the fray. Some reporters whispered, "She's controlling the entire room." Karoline seemed to sense it, pausing for a sip of water before unveiling a large chart. A line graph of public debt, soared vertically, overlaid with poverty rates. "If this is the record you're proud of, all I can say is the people deserve better." Karoline's calm voice contrasted sharply with AOC's growing agitation. This time, AOC stood, pointing directly at Karoline. "This is slander. No independent expert has verified this." Karoline smiled coldly, producing another document. "I'm sorry, but this is a report from the Federal Audit Office. Independent, official, not a Twitter post. And if you'd like, I can read every page." The room fell silent. Even AOC's supporters couldn't deny the document's legitimacy. The committee chair sat motionless, as if witnessing something unprecedented. A young lawmaker, dismissed as a mere communications aide, now commanding the hearing with the precision of a prosecutor. Cameras panned the room. Some reporters texted frantically, "This isn't a political show anymore. It's a public trial." Online hashtags #Leavitt files and #AOC meltdown began trending. Meanwhile, Karoline didn't glance at the screens, focusing only on flipping to the next file. She spoke softly, but the entire room heard, and this is just the warm-up. "If we're talking about integrity, let's keep going." AOC's opening salvo, meant to make Karoline a laughingstock, had become a fatal mistake. The audience felt the power shift from a fiery attack to a confrontation where Karoline held all the cards. And as she closed the first file, everyone knew the systematic dismantling had only just begun. Karoline slowly set the first file aside, her hands steady, her eyes blazing under the harsh hearing room lights. The television audience was still reeling from the exposed figures when she pulled out a new, thicker file labeled in bold red, "Financial Records, Forensic Audit." The tension in the room surged, reporters scrambling to adjust cameras while AOC leaned forward, whispering urgently to an aide, as if seeking a way to stop the flood of data. But Karoline gave her no chance. "Next," she said, her voice even and cold, "we'll talk about money. Because money, more than anything, always reveals the truth." She held up a large printed chart, projected behind her, commanding the room's attention. Over 4 years, under the leadership AOC defends, political funds, PACs, and related nonprofits received over $1.2 billion. That's a massive sum, and it should be fully accounted for. But forensic audits show at least $320 million of it can't be transparently traced. It vanished into a maze of payments to shady consulting firms, shell LLCs, and research contracts that were never published. A gasp rippled through the room. The committee chair banged the gavel for order, but viewers couldn't hide their shock. Karoline pressed on, flipping to another page, reading each word. Wells Fargo and Chase Bank filed 17 suspicious activity reports on transfers tied to this network. Many transactions were split into amounts under $10,000, showing clear signs of structuring to evade federal reporting laws. If an ordinary citizen did this, the IRS would have knocked on their door long ago. AOC shot up, her voice shrill. "This is distortion. We've never faced criminal charges." Karoline cut her off, her expression unchanged. "Not being charged doesn't mean clean. It might just mean you haven't been exposed yet. And today, before the American people, it's time for the truth to come to light." Reporters erupted, some young audience members, letting out wows. Karoline opened the file further, revealing scanned contracts. She held one up, a red circle highlighting an expense. Here, a $275,000 payment to a consulting firm, Green Horizons LLC. This company was registered just 3 weeks before the contract, with no employees, no real office. Who got the money? After tracing it, we found it went straight to a joint account linked to the governor's close associate, and notably, AOC's own trusted communications aide. The room exploded. Lawmakers whispered, cameras clicked, and #Green Horizons began trending online. AOC tried to regain control, her voice shaky but firm. "You're crafting a fictional story from half-baked pieces." Karoline looked straight at the camera, ignoring her. The American people can read and decide for themselves. All these records will be public after this hearing. Not a story, but evidence. Karoline placed another thick file on the table, secured with gleaming metal clips. This is a forensic analysis by independent financial experts, commissioned by the Federal Audit Office. They identified at least 43 payments with signs of money laundering. Funds moved from political accounts through a chain of LLCs, then returned as legitimate income. It's a pattern identical to cases prosecuted by the Justice Department. A front-row journalist whispered, "She's talking like a prosecutor." Indeed, every word from Karoline seemed rehearsed, precise, unemotional. She didn't need to raise her voice. The evidence spoke loudest. AOC interrupted again, her voice wavering. "You can't turn this hearing into a courtroom. This is oversight." Karoline paused, turned to face AOC, a thin smile appearing. "Correct. This is oversight. And oversight means showing the American people how their tax dollars are used or stolen. If you're afraid of the light, maybe you shouldn't have preached transparency all these years." The retort drew scattered applause from opposing lawmakers. Undeterred by the chair's repeated gavel, Karoline returned to her documents. The report also found 8 COVID relief loans misused. A family business claimed millions in losses but had no actual operations. That money was funneled back into political funds. Documents flashed on the screen, loan applications with signatures, backed by bank data. The room's silence was no longer curiosity, it was shock. She closed the file, her voice low but firm. The American people worked tirelessly to pay taxes, to receive meager relief checks. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of dollars are siphoned off, lost in a web of political interests. That's not just a lack of transparency, it's betrayal. The room erupted. Some lawmakers stood. Reporters shouted for comments. But Karoline sat upright, her gaze icy. She had unleashed a storm with the financial file, and everyone knew this was just the beginning. More devastating revelations awaited. The room was still reeling from the financial file's fallout when Karoline tapped her fingers on the table, signaling for more attention. Cameras swung toward her, the audience holding its breath. "What you've just seen is only the surface," she said, her voice cold but clear. "There have been quiet investigations, not on Twitter, not in press conferences, but in the federal justice system." She pulled out a sealed envelope, gold paper with a red seal, bold text reading, "Federal Grand Jury Proceedings." The room buzzed with oohs and shifting chairs echoing. She held up the envelope, letting the lights catch the text as undeniable proof. A federal grand jury was convened to review related financial transactions. This isn't gossip, not a conspiracy theory, but a legal fact. They've heard testimony, reviewed evidence, analyzed bank statements. Her voice deepened, emphasizing, this has been ongoing for months in silence. Until today, AOC leapt up, her hand shaking as she pointed at Karoline. "You can't disclose grand jury proceedings. This is a serious violation." The room grew noisy, but Karoline didn't flinch, her gaze piercing. "I'm not disclosing investigation secrets," she replied coolly. "I'm stating a fact. An independent body found enough irregularities to launch proceedings. What does that mean? It means we're no longer in the political theater, we're in the realm of law." Reporters scribbled furiously. Some whispered, "This isn't rhetoric anymore. It's an indictment. Online, grand jury, shot to the top trends." Karoline didn't pause. She opened another file, labeled Confidential Audit Report, Federal Oversight Division. Pages flipped, numbers flashed on the big screen. This confidential audit shows over 50 misclassified budget expenditures. Funds labeled as community spending actually flowed to shell companies with no employees, no offices, existing only on paper. We call them shell entities. These companies received tens of millions, then vanished. The room went silent. Karoline continued. Some of these contracts, worth hundreds of thousands, were signed on the exact day of campaign events. If this is just coincidence, it's odd how every coincidence funnels to the same pocket. AOC interrupted, her voice urgent.
"These numbers haven't been publicly verified."
"This is just a draft," Karoline shot back. "No, this is a completed report, signed by the Federal Audit Office.
"I don't need your confirmation."
The seal and signatures here confirm it." She held up the final page, the red seal glaring under the lights. Camera shutters snapped. Some lawmakers whispered, their faces tense. The air felt oxygenless. Karoline leaned into the microphone. What does this mean for us, for the American people? It means the legal system, not a political party, found this evidence serious enough to investigate. And when the law steps in, all excuses are irrelevant. The words landed like a final blow in the unfolding reversal. AOC tried to maintain a steely expression, but her glistening eyes betrayed her anxiety. Karoline closed the file, her hand resting lightly on the cover, her gaze fixed on the camera row. We're no longer talking about campaign slogans, but facing real investigations. And I promise the American people, this is just the beginning.
He's now in shade.
The room exploded. Reporters shouted for comments. Social media ignited. And at that moment, everyone knew the political storm had officially spiraled out of control. Karoline set the confidential audit file aside, her eyes gleaming with a cold light that seasoned reporters recognized, the sign of a heavier blow coming. Her hand pulled a gray document box from under the table, labeled in bright red, Enterprise Structure. Confidential. The room stirred again, with shifting chairs and rapid camera clicks. Karoline placed the box on the table, with deliberate slowness, as if giving the audience a moment to brace for the real storm about to begin. You've just seen, she said in a steady, low voice, where the money went and how it disappeared. But the bigger question is who was behind those shady flows. Today, I'll show you the entire network. A network no different from a systematic criminal organization, operating exactly like a RICO scheme. Some lawmakers shuddered. The name RICO, Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act, was tied to infamous mafia cases, to organized crime syndicates. Bringing it into the political arena was rare. And now Karoline was speaking before a live national broadcast. She opened the box, pulling out a large poster and placing it on an easel for the entire room and cameras to see clearly. It was a massive spiderweb diagram, with a red circle labeled Core Network at the center, radiating dozens of smaller branches connected by arrows and bank symbols. This is a diagram constructed by the Federal Audit Committee's forensic analysts. Do you see the center? Political PACs, a few consulting firms, and nonprofits set up as fronts. From there, money is funneled to dozens of paper-only LLCs. Ultimately, it returns to the pockets of powerful individuals, the ones orchestrating this charade. Karoline pointed directly at one branch. This is Blue Horizon Consulting. Over 3 years, it received nearly $80 million from political funds. But upon investigation, we found the company has no real office, no staff, just an abandoned P.O. box in Sacramento. Money flows in, then gets redirected to various personal accounts. Notably, a significant portion ends up in accounts tied to campaign operatives. A commotion erupted from the lawmakers' seats. AOC slammed her hand on the table. This is political slander. You have no evidence linking specific individuals. Karoline swiftly turned the diagram, flipping to the back. A series of bank statements with glaring red stamps appeared on the large screen. Here's the evidence. Every arrow on this diagram is backed by a verified bank transfer order. Not opinions, not speculation, but documented money flows with electronic signatures and bank seals. If this happened to any ordinary citizen, they'd have been prosecuted long ago. But here, it's been happening in the shadows, under a political veneer. The room buzzed with murmurs. Some opposition lawmakers quietly bowed their heads, avoiding the camera's gaze. Karoline didn't let anyone catch their breath. Continuing, look at this branch, Green Future Alliance. It claims to be an environmental fund, but over 2 years, more than $40 million from this fund was cycled through 3 private companies, then returned to personal accounts of network members. This is textbook money laundering. We've seen it with the Italian mafia, with South American cartels, and now right in the heart of American politics. AOC tried to interrupt, her voice urgent. Comparing this to the mafia is an insult. This is an abuse of oversight power, but her words were drowned out by the committee chair's gavel. Order. The room quieted, leaving only Karoline's voice cutting through like a blade. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room, then lowered her voice like a prosecutor addressing a jury. RICO isn't just for the mafia. It was written to dismantle any organization that conspires, launders money, commits fraud, and uses the system to enrich a small, powerful group. What you're seeing here is a RICO-style network, with all the hallmarks: a tight structure, layered money flows, legal fronts, and a singular goal, power and profit. A reporter whispered, "She's building a living indictment." On Twitter, the hashtag #RICO trended within minutes, alongside memes comparing Karoline's diagram to mafia webs in movies. Karoline continued, flipping to another data sheet. From 2021 to 2024, this group executed at least 63 suspicious transactions, exceeding $200,000 each. Of those, 28 showed signs of smurfing, breaking down sums to avoid bank monitoring systems. This is classic money laundering behavior. And let me repeat, these reports come from the bank's SAS suspicious activity reports, not from my imagination. The tension in the room hit a peak. Some journalists exchanged glances, shaking their heads in disbelief. Viewers watching the broadcast felt like they were in a courtroom drama, not an oversight hearing. The difference was, this was real, unfolding before their eyes with vivid numbers, files, and diagrams. AOC said nothing this time. She sat silently, staring at the spiderweb diagram on the screen. The audience could see her initial confidence had vanished, replaced by the demeanor of someone trapped in an unstoppable flood of evidence. Karoline closed with a lowered voice. The American people deserve the truth. They deserve to understand that their tax dollars, donations, and relief funds didn't vanish by chance. They were siphoned into a sophisticated power network, a network no different from the criminal organizations we've prosecuted before. And if RICO can apply to the mafia, it can certainly apply to anyone in this room. Silence enveloped the room. Every eye was on Karoline. On the large screen, the spiderweb diagram glowed, like a verdict hanging over the accused. Everyone understood this hearing had transcended ordinary politics. It had become a public indictment, and Karoline Leavitt was the unofficial but formidable prosecutor. The heavy silence lingered after Karoline's presentation on the RICO-style power network. The massive diagram still glowed on the screen behind her, its arrows and circles binding the room's atmosphere. But Karoline wasn't done. She lightly placed her hand on a small silver box, the microphone catching the click as the lock snapped open. The entire room held its breath, knowing that in organized crime investigations, after diagrams and financial files come the most vivid evidence, audio, visuals, the undeniable. Karoline pulled out a USB labeled "Authorized Intercepts." Internal leak. She held it up, letting hundreds of camera lenses zoom in. I know some here will say, it's all just numbers, charts, and papers. So let's hear the people in this network speak for themselves. Her voice dropped, resolute. The media technicians activated the large screen, the room's speakers crackling lightly before a familiar male voice rang out, clearly recorded in a private conversation. If we keep pushing it all through that consulting firm, no one will notice. Break it down. Keep it under the reporting threshold. Like last time. The financials will look clean as water. The room erupted. Reporters scrambled to write. Cameras flashed relentlessly. Karoline waited a few seconds for the uproar to swell before speaking. That wasn't me speaking. That's not speculation. That's the voice of a close advisor, discussing how to split money to avoid bank reporting. And there's another clip, she signaled, and the next recording played. A sharp, anxious female voice. The media's starting to ask about the homeless contract. Make sure it's not traceable. We'll relabel it as community services. Sounds more humane. The room shook. Some lawmakers whispered, "My God." On social media, new hashtags exploded. #Leavitt tapes, #audio evidence. AOC shot up, her face flushed. This is illegal. No one can wiretap officials without a court order. Karoline turned, her voice unwavering. Correct. Which is why I confirm these recordings were made under a court order, per legal oversight procedures. They're not the product of rumors or baseless leaks. This is evidence stored by authorities, and today I'm bringing it to light for the American people to hear firsthand. She flipped another page in the file, holding it up, a copy of a court order with a round seal. Cameras zoomed in, millions of viewers at home seeing every word clearly. Karoline returned to the microphone. Listen to the next clip. Dated June 14, 2023. The audio played a hoarse male voice, speaking quietly but firmly. We have to make sure the governor isn't directly tied. Wrote the money through the environmental fund, then to the PAC, then to the LLC. Keep him off the paper trail. If anyone asks, he can say, "I don't know." A sharp gasp echoed from somewhere in the room. Journalists locked eyes, faces stunned. This was no longer suspicion, but clear talk of shielding responsibility for a powerful figure. Karoline let the audio finish, then paused. She looked directly at AOC, her voice calm but steely. These are the people you just praised, called leaders elected time and again. So what will the American people think when they hear their inner circle discussing how to skirt the law, dodge accountability, and turn budgets into word games? The room exploded, uncontainable. The committee chair banged the gavel repeatedly, but the noise persisted. Reporters began broadcasting headlines. Karoline Leavitt drops shocking audio evidence. Karoline remained composed, signaling the technician. The final clip, October 22nd, 2023. The speakers played another male voice. If we handle the foreign donation through the environmental fund, no one will dig deeper. They'll think it's climate funding. Who'd suspect money for saving the environment? A chuckle, then silence. Another shockwave swept the room. Some young lawmakers slumped in their chairs, hands on foreheads. AOC paled, her lips moving as if to object, but no words came. On Twitter, the audio clip spread like wildfire, captioned, "This is the definition of political money laundering." Karoline closed the USB, her voice resolute. Audio doesn't lie. Americans just heard how this system operates, from the mouths of those inside it. Remember, I don't need more rhetoric. The truth ringing out is enough. The room's atmosphere was suffocating. Some reporters whispered, "She's changed the entire game." A veteran lawmaker behind her shook his head. "This isn't a hearing anymore. This is a live prosecution before the public." Karoline gently closed the document box, her gaze cold. "And I warn you, what you've just heard is only the beginning. Because there are more layers, things presented to the grand jury, and the American people will know them too." Silence blanketed the room. Cameras zoomed in on AOC's face. She tried to muster a smile, but her trembling lips betrayed her. Viewers across America understood that this audio blow was a fatal crack in the defensive wall built on political slogans. From here, the downward spiral had begun, unstoppable. The room was still buzzing after the recordings hit like lightning in a clear sky. But Karoline didn't let the audience catch its breath. She slid the audio file box aside and pulled out a new file, dark green, labeled in bold foreign funding and influence. FARA analysis. Cameras zoomed in on the cover, the red capital letters signaling something clear. We were about to enter a whole new layer of accusations. Foreign influence. Karoline opened the first page, her voice steady, each word hammering at the foundation of democracy. What you just heard showed how this network manipulates domestic money. But it's graver still. It's not just an internal story. There are clear signs of funds from organizations directly tied to foreign governments. And that's a blatant violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. FARA. The room erupted again. Some reporters stood, scribbling frantically, while cameras zoomed in on AOC's face. She tried to stay calm, but her eyes flashed with panic. Karoline flipped to the second page, the large screen displaying a financial statement. Over 2 years, 3 U.S.-based nonprofits, Green Climate Fund, Justice Alliance, and Climate Action Network, received nearly $847,000 from funds directly rooted in Beijing. The money was then distributed to advocacy networks in California and Washington. And let me stress, these include funds AOC has publicly championed. A roar of murmurs rose. The committee chair banged the gavel repeatedly, but Karoline had seized the room's atmosphere. She continued, flipping to a comparison chart. One side showed AOC's Green New Deal text, the other a Chinese environmental policy document. Forensic linguistic analysis shows portions of the Green New Deal match China's text by up to 80%. Some sections are verbatim translations. This isn't just shared influence. This is direct policy copying, reflecting a foreign government's interests. The room went silent. Viewers at home were glued to their screens, tweets spreading like a storm. AOC's Green New Deal = Beijing's policy. AOC shot up, her voice frantic. This is blatant fabrication. Environmental policies have global similarities. You can't call it copying. Karoline turned, locking eyes with her. If it's just similarity, explain why a 2022 draft of yours has phrasing identical, down to commas, to a Beijing document issued 6 months earlier. AOC was speechless. The room buzzed with chatter. Karoline pressed on, holding up a photo of a wire transfer receipt, showing an international bank's logo and a New York advocacy fund as the recipient. This is direct evidence. Money from a foreign entity, routed through an environmental intermediary, then poured into domestic political activities. This requires FARA registration. No such registration exists. That's a federal law violation. Her words landed like a verdict. Reporters sent out breaking news. On Twitter, #FARA files climbed to the top 3 nationwide. Karoline paused, then spoke slowly, each word deliberate. Americans deserve to know if policies promoted as environmental and social justice are truly that, or just a front for foreign interests. This is no longer about domestic corruption. This is a national security risk. In the room, some opposition lawmakers whispered, their faces tense. AOC slumped into her chair, gripping the table's edge. Karoline displayed a leaked email, where a political advisor wrote, "Ensure the Green Climate Fund's funding isn't directly exposed. Use local environmental groups as a shield." The uproar surged again, but this time no one could hide the shock. She closed the file, her voice low but resonant. "This is just the start of the foreign funding file. These records will be sent to the Justice Department and Treasury, and I assure you, the truth never sides with darkness." The hearing room fell silent. Cameras zoomed in on Karoline's unwavering face. Viewers understood this hearing had transcended political arguments. It had become a confrontation about loyalty to America or to foreign money bags. The air remained thick after Karoline closed the foreign funding file. Images of money flows from international funds and near verbatim text from Beijing documents lingered in everyone's minds. But Karoline didn't stop there. She calmly set the green file aside and pulled out another, orange, labeled in bold, crisis exploitation, strategic evidence. Murmurs rose again. Everyone knew this was the next layer of her systematic dismantling. Karoline opened the first page, the large screen instantly displaying a chart of California's COVID-19 budget. The American people need to hear this. Her voice rang out, because a crisis isn't just a test for leadership. It's an opportunity for the power-hungry to profit. And here, we have evidence that crises were exploited as political tools. She pointed at the chart. Over $12 billion was allocated for COVID relief programs, but audits show at least $2.3 billion went to murky contracts. Some were signed with newly formed companies, with no medical experience, but close ties to political figures. This isn't crisis governance. This is using a crisis to build power and wealth. Reporters whispered. Cameras flashed. Karoline flipped to another image, a photo of an empty warehouse, listed on paper as a storage site for medical protective equipment, a $180 million contract for masks and PPE, she read. But the storage site was an empty warehouse, no supplies. Californians lined up for masks, while their tax dollars vanished. Gasps echoed through the room. AOC stood, her voice high. "You're smearing our pandemic response. Thousands died. You can't turn tragedy into a political tool." Karoline turned, her gaze icy. "Exactly. Thousands died. That's why we can't stay silent when some turned blood and tears into profit. I'm not smearing. I'm reading what the audit reports revealed." The room fell silent. She flipped to a new page. This time a chart on California's wildfires. In 2020 and 2021, as wildfires ravaged, the state received hundreds of millions in federal funds to improve fire prevention infrastructure. But nearly half went to media contracts, ads, videos, image campaigns for politicians. Instead of clearing forests, they cleared their image. A horrified gasp rose from the audience. Karoline paused, her gaze sweeping the room. A crisis should be when leaders prove their mettle, provide relief, protect people. But here, crises were used as a stage, where people's suffering became a backdrop for campaign photos. She continued, this time addressing the energy crisis. In August 2022, California faced rolling blackouts. People sat in the dark, air conditioners off, hospitals running on generators, and at the same time, a $75 million contract was signed with a renewable energy promotion company to produce videos praising the administration's achievements. The people had no power, but the image campaign was brightly lit. AOC tried to interject. This is blatant distortion. Energy promotion is necessary to raise awareness. Karoline cut her off, her voice sharp as a blade. raise awareness, or raise personal profiles. Because while people worried about the refrigerator spoiling, polished videos played across TV screens. Let Americans decide what the truth is. Social media erupted outside, hashtags #CrisisCash and #exploited. Pain began trending. Reporters exchanged glances, some shaking their heads in dismay. Karoline lowered her voice, almost a whisper, but the microphone carried it through the room. Every crisis leaves a scar, but those scars aren't just in the people's memories. They're etched into budgets, contracts, and bank accounts. And when crises are seen as opportunities to wave flags, take photos, and boost political profiles, that's no longer leadership. It's betrayal. Her final words landed heavily, silencing the room to the point where a dropped pen could be heard. A few opposition lawmakers bowed their heads, avoiding the cameras. AOC sat frozen, her face tense, while Karoline closed the file, her hand resting on the orange cover, as if to say this is just one of many layers of truth. She looked up, her voice steady again. The American people don't need dramas built on their tragedies. They need the truth. And today, the truth is written in every number. No one in the hearing room spoke. They didn't need to. Everyone understood another layer of the defensive wall had crumbled, and the storm Karoline Leavitt was unleashing showed no signs of stopping. The room hadn't yet recovered from the cold numbers exposing how crises were exploited when Karoline reached for another file. Dark brown, stamped in red at the top. Family network. Financial fraud. Murmurs erupted immediately. No one expected her to go this far, not just exposing political contracts and foreign funds, but unraveling a financial network tied directly to her opponent's family. Karoline opened the first page, the screen behind her displaying a money flow diagram centered on a familiar name, a family business often touted in the press as a small pride, now in the spotlight of an investigation. Over 4 years, Karoline began, her voice slow and deliberate. This business received over $340,000 from political funds, listed as consulting and construction services. But federal audits show no construction permits, no employees, no actual projects. On paper, they built. In reality, they only built a money laundering network. Gasps of shock rose from several rows. Karoline continued, flipping to a new page. We have evidence of at least 8 instances where this family business received funds from a PAC, then immediately transferred them to personal accounts. This is classic behavior, creating fake invoices to turn political money into legitimate income. Taxpayers fund services, not personal accounts fattened by schemes. Cameras zoomed in on AOC's face. She bit her lip, clearly wanting to interrupt, but unable to find words weighty enough. Karoline gave her no chance, pulling out a stack of fake payroll records. This is a list of personnel paid by the family business. Do you see this name? The opponent's brother. Over 2 years, he received $180,000 for consulting, but there's no evidence of work. No emails, no reports, no trace of activity. That's called a ghost job, and that money came from federal budgets. A loud murmur surged. Some reporters stood, faces stunned. On social media, #FamilyFraud began spreading. Karoline paused, her gaze piercing the cameras. Americans are no strangers to this kind of fraud. In major money laundering cases, the pattern is always the same: shell companies, ghost employees, fake invoices. The difference here is it's not happening in the mafia's shadows, but in the bright light of politics. AOC shot up, her voice shrill. This is blatant fabrication. Those expenses were legal, reported on taxes. Karoline turned, a cold smile flickering. Legal. Then explain why the IRS opened an investigation last March. I have here a copy of the IRS's information requests sent to that business. They don't send requests when everything's clean. She held up a document, the IRS seal glaring on the big screen. The room fell silent, suffocating. A few lawmakers exchanged tense whispers. The committee chair banged the gavel for order, but no one truly listened. Karoline didn't stop. She opened another document, this time a COVID-era loan file. In 2020, this family business applied for a small business administration loan, claiming over $500,000 in losses. They received $125,000 in relief. But audits show no business activity, no canceled contracts, no laid-off workers. The entire loan went straight to personal accounts. Americans struggled for a few thousand in aid, while here relief money became a gift to a ghost business. A small groan echoed somewhere in the room. Cameras panned to AOC, her face pale, fingers gripping the table's edge. Karoline slowly closed the file, her voice low. Family is where we find trust, love, and moral grounding. But here family became a tool to siphon budgets, hide political money, and deceive those who placed their trust in them. If this is called integrity, then integrity has been insulted. The words shattered the atmosphere. Some reporters typed rapidly, "Leavitt exposes family corruption." A new hashtag emerged, #FamilyNetwork. Karoline looked straight at the camera row, her face expressionless, her voice clear. Americans have a right to know that when they vote, pay taxes, and sacrifice in crises, some turn that trust into cash. And Americans have a right to decide, will they keep accepting it, or will they put an end to it? The room sank into silence. No one dared speak, but all knew another piece of the defensive wall had collapsed, and the storm named Karoline Leavitt pressed on, layer upon layer of evidence still unrelenting. The air in the hearing room was so heavy that every small sound echoed like thunder. Karoline's revelations about the power network, ghost contracts, and family business had frozen the room, but everyone knew the final blow was yet to come. As Karoline stood calmly, pulling out a large chart under the lights, boldly labeled Comprehensive RICO Case File, Full Enterprise Mapping, every eye locked onto her. "We've seen the scattered pieces," Karoline began, her voice even and sharp. "But to understand the full picture, you need to see how they connect. This isn't just isolated financial missteps, a few shady contracts, or a greedy family business. This is an organization, an enterprise, operating systematically, structurally, with one goal: amassing power and wealth for a select few, while hiding it all under a political veneer." She flicked the chart, the screen behind her, displaying a complete diagram, a red circle labeled Core Leadership at the center, radiating dozens of green branches connecting to PCs, environmental funds, shell companies, ghost LLCs, and ultimately personal accounts. Arrows crisscrossed, annotated with dollar amounts and transfer dates. "This is a textbook RICO model," Karoline said, her finger tracing each part. "We have ballers, the executive body, powerful figures at the center, making decisions, signing contracts, issuing orders. Shell companies, hastily formed LLCs, no employees, no operations, just for receiving and moving money. PCs and political funds, outwardly advocating for social justice or the environment, but really channels for money laundering. Beneficiaries, family, aides, trusted associates, paid salaries or consulting fees for no real work, cover-up tactics, false reports, disguised contracts, media campaigns to deflect attention." She paused, letting the room absorb each word. "If this isn't a RICO enterprise, I don't know what is." Murmurs erupted, some lawmakers leaning forward to study the diagram. Cameras zoomed in on AOC's face, pale, eyes glistening, trying to hold firm but unable to hide her anxiety. Karoline continued, "Over 4 years, this enterprise executed at least 112 transactions with money laundering signs, totaling over $600 million, 43 suspicious activity reports from banks, 28 contracts with no real deliverables, 8 ghost businesses run by relatives, and most importantly, all share one thing: they flow to the pockets of those at the diagram's center." A reporter blurted, "It's just like the mafia." Karoline nodded slightly. Yes, RICO was written to combat the mafia, but today, we must use it for those who've turned politics into a cartel. No guns, no drugs, but the same model: a syndicate, money laundering, family, allies, and above all, complicit silence. The room exploded. Some opposition lawmakers covered their mouths. Others leaned back, helpless. The committee chair banged the gavel repeatedly, but couldn't quell the chaos. AOC shot up, her voice shrill, almost shouting, "This is an abuse of oversight power. This isn't a courtroom." Karoline turned, her gaze steely, her voice firm. "No, this isn't a courtroom, but it's where the truth rings out, and the American people are the jury. They see, they hear, and they'll judge with their votes." Scattered applause broke out, quickly silenced by the gavel, but enough to stir the audience. Outside, on social media, #RICO Enterprise, shot to #1. Karoline returned to the diagram, pointing at each arrow. Here's $275,000 from an environmental fund through Green Horizons LLC, turned into personal income. Here's $125,000 in COVID relief through a family business, then gone. Here's tens of millions from international funds through Climate Action Network, then funding political campaigns. See, every piece fits. Every number points to the same place. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. This is no longer administrative error. This isn't poor management. This is an enterprise, deliberate, structured, strategic, and directed from the center. And under RICO, every individual involved, whether signing contracts, moving money, or benefiting, can be held accountable. A heavy silence fell. Cameras panned to AOC's row. She sat frozen, lips trembling, as if realizing her initial attacks had become kindling for a public trial. Karoline closed, her voice low but far-reaching. Americans are too familiar with slogans, too tired of promises. But what you've just seen isn't slogans. It's money trails, diagrams, evidence. And this enterprise, this RICO network, will no longer hide behind campaign signs or lofty speeches. It's been dragged into the light. The room erupted one last time. Reporters rushed out. Phones rang. Social media blazed. Americans, millions watching, knew they'd witnessed not just a hearing, but a comprehensive indictment, where RICO was no longer tied to movie mafias, but to powerful faces in that very congressional room. The uproar still echoed after Karoline closed the comprehensive RICO diagram. Cameras panned the room, capturing tense faces, sweat beading on lawmakers' foreheads. For a moment, it seemed the entire defense had collapsed. But then, from the left row, AOC stood. She slammed her hands on the table, breathing heavily, her voice piercing through the murmurs. Enough. This is no longer oversight. It's a witch hunt orchestrated by the far right. Karoline Leavitt isn't a prosecutor. She's just Trump's mouthpiece, someone who's never held a position to understand how government works. Her words sparked the room, some allied lawmakers clapping in support. AOC seized the moment, turning to the cameras. Americans are watching, and they need to see the truth. This is a plot to destroy progressive leaders, to silence those who dare stand against authoritarian power. They drag out numbers, contracts, but forget every decision was made in a crisis. She's painting me as the villain to boost her own name. Karoline sat still, her gaze icy. She didn't interrupt, letting AOC pour out her energy, and AOC didn't miss the chance. She grabbed a stack of papers from her aide, holding them high. These are copies of books Karoline edited for the Trump administration. She earned tens of thousands in royalties while holding a White House role. Isn't that a conflict of interest? Isn't that blatant political profiteering? The uproar grew. AOC stepped from her seat, pointing at Karoline. You have no standing to preach morality here. You have no standing to attack a lawfully elected governor. Californians know who led them through the pandemic, through wildfires. And you're just a spokesperson who's never run any government. Some Democratic lawmakers nodded, a few chiming in. That's right. Table pounding and cheers rose. The room briefly a battlefield. On social media, #witchhunt surged. AOC's supporters sharing her speech, calling it a fiery counterattack. The committee chair banged the gavel repeatedly, but the eruption persisted. AOC pressed on, her voice breaking but growing fiercer. If this is truly a hearing, why is all the evidence one-sided? Why are no independent witnesses called? Why are we letting an unelected woman turn this into her personal stage? In that moment, many viewers might have felt AOC had regained some ground. She projected the image of a cornered fighter, still shouting to claim the moral high ground. The room shook with chaos, as if the tide could turn. But in Karoline's eyes, it was all desperate flailing. She sat upright, hands clasped on the table, waiting for AOC to exhaust herself. When AOC paused to catch her breath, Karoline leaned toward the microphone, her voice low but each word sharp as a blade. Thank you, Representative Ocasio-Cortez. You've just proven one thing. When you can't refute evidence, you attack the person. When you can't deny data, you shout slogans. And when you can't face the truth, you yell louder, hoping the noise drowns out the numbers. But Americans are smarter than that. The contrast, one side shouting, the other calm, spoke volumes. Two viewers, AOC had lost control, while Karoline held the reins. And everyone knew that desperate counterattack, instead of salvaging, only underscored that the tide had fully turned. The echo of AOC's shouts still lingered in the room, like the final tremors of a misdirected storm. Cameras zoomed in on her face, but all viewers saw was exhaustion, a hoarse voice, and dazed eyes. Karoline sat still, hands clasped tightly, calmly observing, like a fighter, knowing her opponent's last punch missed. Then, as the air settled, she gently pulled the microphone closer, her hand slowly drawing a small black box, labeled in bright red, wire evidence, intercepted communications. The room erupted. Everyone remembered how the first recordings had shaken things, close advisors discussing splitting transactions, relabeling contracts to hide, and maneuvering money flows. Now Karoline was about to drop more evidence, and no one dared guess what was coming. She plugged the USB into the projector, the large screen lighting up. Karoline spoke slowly, each word deliberate. If the earlier recordings showed how the network operates, this next set will show you who really gave the orders and what they knew. Her voice deepened. On November 4th, 2023, a 12-minute call was recorded under federal court authority. This is an excerpt. The speakers crackled, a familiar male voice, calm but clear. Make sure the relief contracts don't trace directly to us. Split them into 2 streams. One for the media company, one for the family LLC. Don't let any invoice have my signature. The room exploded. Gasps. Reporters hammering keyboards. Some lawmakers shook their heads in disbelief. Karoline signaled for silence, then said, "That's the voice of a key figure," and he knew exactly how to avoid a paper trail. AOC shouted, "Impossible. This is edited. Fabricated." Karoline remained unfazed. She held up a set of papers with a round seal, reading, Court Order Number 23 FB 418, signed by a federal judge. These recordings were legally obtained under agency oversight. They're not fabricated but verified evidence. The screen switched to the second clip. A female voice, tense but resolute. "The media's getting suspicious. We'll buy more image consulting services. Use the environmental fund as a shield. They'll never dig into the source." The room fell silent. The words echoed clearly, and everyone understood their weight. This was no longer a mistake but deliberate intent. Karoline looked directly at the camera row, her voice low but firm. "You heard it. Not just shady money flows, but a systematic cover-up plan. The people in this network knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew it was wrong." She moved to the third recording, this time noisier, like a private meeting. Another male voice sneered, "Let the media make a fuss, as long as we keep the money. The public will forget quickly. A loud enough slogan will cover everything." Laughter broke out, falling into the deathly silence of the room. A reporter whispered, "This is a career-killing moment." An older lawmaker groaned softly, slogans covering the truth. They confessed themselves. AOC tried to interrupt. "This is just staged theater. I demand it be struck." But the committee chair banged the gavel. "Order. The evidence is valid." Karoline closed the audio segment, scanning the room, her gaze cutting like a knife. Americans have heard the truth. Not from me, not from the press, but from the mouths of those involved. They discussed how to hide, how to split, how to misdirect. They laughed at the public's expense, believing people would forget. But today, the people won't forget. Today, all of America is listening. On social media, the recordings spread like wildfire. Hashtags hash. They knew, and hashwire evidence shot to #1. TV networks cut to the clips live, with commentators calling it a fatal blow. AOC slumped into her chair, pale. She muttered to her aide, but the microphone caught it. "No way. We had this under control." Those words, unintentionally, reached millions of viewers. Karoline leaned forward, gathering her documents, lightly tapping her fingers on the table. The first audio salvo shook things up. This second one, I believe, has sealed the door on excuses. And remember, I'm only halfway through this file. The room sank into a silence, heavier than any prior shouts. Everyone understood. This was no longer a political debate. It was an unwitting confession broadcast live, striking at the heart of the power network. The echoes of the second recordings still reverberated in the room. TV viewers hadn't torn their eyes from the screen. Reporters hadn't finished typing their breaking headlines when Karoline calmly packed away the audio box and pulled out a new file under the lights. Its thick cover bore red text, "Final Summary." comprehensive charges. The room went silent. Even the noisiest lawmakers held their breath, knowing this was the kill shot. Karoline stood, her hand firm on the file's cover. Her voice rang out, each word icy. We've gone through layers of evidence, financial records, secret audits, a RICO-style network, internal recordings, foreign influence, crisis exploitation, and even family fraud. But at this point, we can't just look at scattered pieces. We must see the whole, and the whole is a devastating picture. The screen lit up, displaying bold text, comprehensive federal violations. Bullet points appeared, each paired with images and numbers. Karoline read clearly, like a prosecutor delivering an indictment. Over $600 million in suspicious transactions over 4 years, or 43 suspicious activity reports from commercial banks, each shell companies run by family and associates with no real operations. $125,000 in misappropriated COVID relief, $340,000 funneled through a family business for money laundering, $847,000 in foreign-sourced funds, violating FARA, direct audio evidence of cover-ups, splitting transactions, and media manipulation to deflect. With each line she read, reporters typed frantically. Cameras zoomed in. Viewers at home sat stunned by the numbers. Karoline looked up, her gaze steely. If any ordinary citizen did even one of these things, they'd be in prison by now. But when it happens under a political cloak, some think they can escape. Today, that cloak has been torn apart. AOC stood, trying to shout, "This is fabricated. This is blatant manipulation." But her voice sounded hollow, weak. No one in the room joined her. Lawmakers who had nodded in support earlier now bowed their heads, silent. Even longtime allies avoided the cameras. Karoline continued, flipping to the final page, her voice low but resolute. I'll read the final summary. This isn't opinion. This is forensic evidence, verified documents, and words from the mouths of those involved. And this is the conclusion. This network operated like a criminal organization, violating RICO, FARA, federal finance laws, and emergency relief regulations. This is a betrayal of the American people's trust. The microphone's echo was like a hammer striking. The room sank into a thick silence. Karoline paused, then turned directly to the cameras, as if speaking to millions watching. The American people have heard, have seen, and now have the right to decide. You can keep believing in slogans, in polished images, or you can believe in the truth that power was abused, money was stolen, and trust was betrayed. I lay all this evidence before the public, and I trust Americans won't let it stand. A burst of applause erupted from the back rows. This time, the committee chair didn't bang the gavel to stop it. The clapping spread, echoing through the room. Cameras panned to AOC, her face pale, lips trembling, unable to form words. In the harsh light, the contrast was stark. One side had lost everything. The other had claimed power through truth. Karoline closed the file, her hand tapping the cover, one last time. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't the end of a hearing. It's the start of accountability. And as I said from the beginning, the truth doesn't belong to the darkness. The room exploded. The press shouted, Leavitt delivers the kill shot. AOC exposed in full indictment. Social media ignited. Hashtags hash. Final blow and hash truth. Wins soaring to #1 nationwide. In that moment, everyone knew Karoline had landed the final blow, and AOC's political career, along with the network behind her, had been forever altered. The applause still echoed as Karoline closed her final file. Camera lights flashed like lightning in a political storm that had just erupted. But the aftershocks didn't stop within Congress's walls. They spread outward, flooding social media, newsrooms, and even the streets where people were glued to screens. The consequences came immediately, fierce and irreversible. In the hearing room, AOC slumped into her chair, face ashen. She covered the microphone, whispering to her aide, but cameras caught her trembling lips. We weren't prepared for this. That whisper, caught unintentionally, went viral on Twitter with millions of views. Those who had cheered AOC now exchanged confused glances, realizing the progressive warrior image had crumbled in hours. Democratic lawmakers in the room, silent since the RICO evidence and recordings, grew visibly uneasy. Some left their seats, slipping into the hallway, avoiding lenses. The committee chair banged the gavel, announcing a recess. But it was as good as an admission. There was no salvaging this. Outside the hearing room, reporters swarmed. As doors opened, microphones, cameras, and phones thrust toward lawmakers. A CNN reporter shouted, "Representative Nadler, do you still support AOC?" Nadler bowed his head, walking away without answering. Fox News cut live, running the ticker. Allies turn away, AOC abandoned. On social media, the situation was even fiercer. Hashtags #AOC, destroyed, #final blow, and #Leavitt files dominated the top 5 nationwide trends. Clips of the recordings echoed everywhere, splitted under the reporting threshold. No invoice, with my signature. A loud slogan will cover everything. Users called it the most public confession in congressional history. In New York, dozens gathered outside AOC's district office, holding signs, "We were betrayed." In California, local news interviewed residents. Many expressed anger, saying they felt exploited. Families who lost homes to wildfires, small businesses ruined by COVID, spoke out. They turned our tragedies into campaign ads. Now the truth is clear. Meanwhile, Karoline walked into the hallway, her posture straight, her gaze calm. Reporters bombarded her. "Will you send these files to the Justice Department? Should AOC resign immediately?" Karoline replied simply, "Americans have heard the truth. Accountability now lies with the law and the voters." That response, broadcast live, was praised by an NBC commentator. This is the voice of someone who knows where real power lies. By afternoon, TV networks ran special reports. An MSNBC editor, typically pro-AOC, admitted the weight of the evidence is undeniable. This is a heavy blow to progressives. Fox News went further, with a ticker blaring. Karoline Leavitt, the woman who took down the left's icon. In Congress, Democratic leaders held emergency meetings. Many feared that without distancing from AOC, the entire progressive wing would be swept into the vortex. A leaked source to Politico revealed they're discussing asking AOC to resign to save the party. The news sent political markets reeling. Meanwhile, advocacy groups tied to AOC fell silent. Justice Democrats' website, once constantly updated with her speeches, went dormant. Major donors, when asked, gave the same reply. "We're assessing the situation." To observers, this signaled AOC's career was effectively stalled. Among voters, rapid polls that evening showed over 68% said they no longer trusted AOC. 54% believed she should resign immediately. The numbers spread like a second thunderbolt, slamming shut AOC's window of hope. In stark contrast, Karoline's image soared. On TikTok, clips of her holding up the RICO file, reading the indictment in a cold voice, hit tens of millions of views in hours. Political YouTube accounts called the hearing her national debut. Some analysts even asked, could she be the face of a new Republican generation? In newsrooms, editors juxtaposed the contrasting images. AOC, dazed and sweating, versus Karoline, calm with her hand on the file. The two images ran side by side on hundreds of outlets, symbolizing an invisible power shift. It all unfolded within hours of the hearing. A morning that began with AOC's bold attacks ended in heavy silence and an unprecedented political storm. People would debate the details, evidence, and legal fallout for years. But one thing was undeniable: the consequences hit immediately, and they changed the entire game. The final scattered applause in the hearing room faded, but the echoes of the historic session didn't. As night fell over Washington, the glow of millions of screens across America flared, replaying Karoline Leavitt closing her file and declaring the truth doesn't belong to the darkness. That line, repeated most that night, was printed on thousands of images, millions of tweets, becoming an unexpected slogan for a new movement taking shape. In the days that followed, American media didn't focus on usual topics like inflation, immigration, or climate. All were overshadowed by the political earthquake dubbed the Leavitt Files. The New York Times headlined, "A progressive icon falls, a conservative star rises." The Washington Post, more cautious, wrote, "Legal fallout unclear, but AOC's political career is shattered." Fox News was blunt. "Leavitt's kill shot. AOC collapses on live TV. Poor AOC. The days ahead were a nightmare. Her New York district office saw constant protests, former voters demanding answers. Donors pulled back, some groups once calling her the future of progressivism, now saying they'd await investigation results. The warrior against power image vanished, replaced by a haggard face quietly exiting Congress amid a press swarm. She tried countering on social media, calling the files a staged attack, but each post fueled thousands of mocking comments. Americans might forgive mistakes, but they rarely forgive exposed deceit so publicly. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt emerged from the storm redefined. From a young spokesperson once dismissed as inexperienced, she became the face of a new generation, fighting with data, not slogans. Universities invited her to speak. Networks vied for interviews. On TikTok, clips of her reading the RICO charges or holding up recordings, set to dramatic music, hit millions of views. The youth, once AOC's stronghold, shared Karoline memes captioned, "Facts over slogans." The long-term fallout went beyond the two women's careers. For Democrats, it was a massive shock. A star of the squad became a liability. Party leaders met in secret, discussing a communications overhaul and new faces. The progressive movement's credibility took a severe hit. Many independent voters, drawn to AOC's authenticity, now felt betrayed. Conversely, Republicans seized the moment. They saw the hearing as proof that progressives aren't immune to corruption. Fundraising campaigns exploded. Voter emails flooded with Karoline's image and the tagline, "Truth has a voice." Donations surged within 72 hours. Conservative commentators hailed Karoline as Trump's natural heir, but cleaner, data-driven, less theatrical. Internationally, European and Asian media covered the story. The Guardian wrote, AOC's career from youthful icon to painful fall. Le Monde called it the Watergate of the TikTok era. Japanese and Korean networks noted, a Latina congresswoman, once a strong voice for the environment, accused of copying Chinese policy, damaged the U.S. climate movement's credibility. Legally, the Justice Department and IRS couldn't ignore it. Investigations opened, starting with COVID relief funds and the family business. AOC's legal team scrambled, but public opinion had solidified. This was no longer a political dispute, but a string of suspicious acts needing prosecution. Each day, AOC sank deeper into a legal and media quagmire. The greatest impact, perhaps, was on American voters' psyche. They'd seen countless hearings, endless promises, but rarely evidence laid out so meticulously, live on air. Many who'd lost faith in Congress were shocked, saying, turns out truth can win. Post-hearing polls showed a slight uptick in congressional trust, the first in years. Though modest, it reflected a public thirst for transparency. For Karoline, the lasting impact was a new career path. Her name became tied to taking down AOC, but more crucially, how she did it. No shouting, no slogans, just files, numbers, and evidence. To many independents, she was the model they'd awaited, a politician wielding truth over theatrics. A month later, at a major Texas conference, the crowd gave Karoline a standing ovation. The host introduced her as the woman who proved slogans can't hide data. Amid the applause, many saw the birth of a figure who could go far beyond her current role. The hearing's story would be retold for years, a milestone where political theater was defeated by hard evidence. And each time people replayed Karoline closing her file, eyes unblinking, her final words echoed, "The truth doesn't belong to the darkness." That was the lasting legacy, a reminder to American politics that light always waits to expose what's hidden, and once the door opens, no power is big enough to close it. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video, where we'll continue witnessing those who think themselves untouchable brought down by the truth.